jump in here. I also need to upload the videos from the last couple weeks. I was staying at a different. I was basically house sitting this weekend, so I had basically no internet.
Have you pushed to get recently?
That's a good
I think
question.
It's been about 20 days.
No. Well, let's do this. Git log.
I was like looking for some stuff. I'm like, man, this is some old stuff. I know we went to Django. But it's not exactly 2 days. I'm sorry. You're right.
You know, some of us have lives. I'm kidding, of course. No, I feel bad that I forgot to do that. It's all up there now.
I mean,
But
you saw the videos were still out. It's just
yeah, the source code probably to me would be more helpful than the videos. I mean, the videos are nice. Don't get me wrong, but if you can't actually look in detail and see what's happening, it's kind of tough to do anything with that. Where are we at here? Okay, so I'll also get the videos uploaded. Let's see here. So, like I said, we talked last week about the, oh, come on. So we talked last week about the Django template language, right? And if we recall, all of our data is passed in to our Django templates through returning this render function, right? So we pass in the template name and we pass in a dictionary of key value pairs containing the key mapping to the variable name in the template, and then the value is the actual value of that variable, right? So we can look at this dictionary that we're passing to our template sort of as an assignment operator, right? So if we were to iterate over all the keys and the values in this dictionary, we would be basically saying test is equal to a string my data. Description is equal to a string, please log in. Now, obviously we can do this with strings, but realistically, we don't even have to do that with strings. I think there's a way to, and I'll get into this. I'll look it up and talk about it Thursday. There's actually should be a way to set string constants, or we would even want to set our string constants in a database. So that way, you know, for things that are dynamically changing, we don't want to include them in the keyword arguments. We want to just put them in the templates themselves. So as far as the templates go, right? So we're rendering and we're passing our data to our template through this render function. But what does the template actually look like? So if we take a look at our Hello World template, and this might be a really short class if I didn't bring my MacBook charger. This might be a really short class.
The one day I didn't bring my charger.
Well, see, I got the new head.
Okay.
So, if we cut short, I'll record it tonight and upload it tomorrow, and we'll just go from there. Okay. What? Oh, come on. Oh, that's right. I started it from the command line. The CD and then IT. So yeah, so if we look at our basic Django app, we're passing in our data via, we're able to access our variables via this double curly brace open close tag with the variable name. And we're able to pull our data back out of that. But as with JSF, we're not always going to be working with purely string or purely numeric variables. What if we want to do some more advanced stuff? What if we want to do an iteration? So if we wanted to do an iteration, what we can do is using the percent bracket similar to, or the percent tag similar to our URL argument here inside of login.html. I can say for v in variables and close with end for. And so what I can do now is, so I've created a for loop, and I've created a variable inside of that for loop. I've said for v in variables. Inside of my for loop, I'm referencing the variable declaration from the header of the for loop the same way as I access a regular variable in the template. So I say for v in variables, and then I open a p tag and drop the variable in there. So if I go back to my views.py and I drop in, let's drop in variables and make it a list. And you can see when I saved that, my Django server automatically reloaded. And so if I reload the page, you can see now I've iterated over my variables. So this is a lot easier than what we were doing in JSF with data tables. If we recall from our data table example, let's see here, data tables, cars table. So, I mean, kind of the same, kind of not. Personally, I think this is a lot easier than, I personally think the Django method is a lot easier than working with data tables in JSF. So now what about conditional statements, right? So say that I want to check to see if, let's say what's a really good example here? Let's say I'm doing a really crappy application, and with every page I'm passing it a conditional determining whether a user is logged into the application. So in login.html, what I'll do is I'll pass in a variable called logged in. If I can type today. And then if I go back to login.html, I'm going to go ahead and just wrap all of this inside of a for loop, or if loop. So I'll say if logged in, and then I can even add an elif. Or I'm sorry, an else. So now, if the user is logged in, so if I go back to my views here, so I'm hard coding in logged in equals true. And what I'll do is I'll also pass in a username. So I'll say user. Whoop. I'll reload my Python server. So you can see that because my user is logged in, I'm getting, and I screwed up and inverted this. Because my user is logged in according to what I'm passing back to the template, I'm seeing the login screen. Now if I set this logged in flag to false, and I reload the page, now I've conditionally shown and displayed data. So, we can get into, I'm trying to think, how much battery do I have left? Because this is really going to drive the conversation around. Let's see here. Let's kill Excel. it was in Excel anyway. No, I don't want to revert to the latest. That's stupid. Let's do, oh, what do we want to do next? So we can get into content blocks today if my battery will hold up. I am not prepared today, am I? So content blocks in Django, remember in JSF when we did this, oh, what's the term called that we were doing? Was it in here? Okay, yeah, so remember in JSF when we were doing UI inserts, and we were able to insert headers and footers, but we weren't able to insert content. What we can do in Django is kind of the inverse, right? So we can create an index page or a certain set of pages that specify certain content, and then describe the content inside of it, right? So we can define a header and a footer and a navigation, and then include that into our content, and much more easily be able to pass data across or pass the same design across the entire application. So let's go in here and we'll create a new HTML file and call it base. And I'm just going to do what I'm going to say now is I'm going to say block content now. How do I do a comment in here? Fun fact, so comments in Django templates are bracket with a pound sign. So kind of the inverse of what's in JSF. So now you might be wondering, so we've set a block content, what goes inside of these content tags. So this is actually where the where this kind of not almost inheritance amongst Django templates comes. So I'll come up here and I'll say create an H2, and I'll come in here to index. And what I can do with index is I can come in here and I can say, so I can get rid of all of this, and I can say, okay, index extends my template.html, and then I can say block content and block. So what have I done here? I've done a couple of things. I've extended my template.html, and I've wrapped all of my main content of index into a content block. Now, what do we think is going to happen when we run this and we navigate to the index and render this template? Why is that?
I think that would actually render. I guess you have to piece out.
Let's see what happens when we do that. So we'll bounce our server and we'll navigate to the login page. And you were right. But I'm not getting any errors on this side.
It's not my template, it's base HTML, isn't it?
Oh, you're right, it's base HTML. Whoops. That's, yeah. Oops.
Alright.
So now what we've done, right, is we've loaded both base HTML and index.html. And what's happening here is when we say extends, basically we're saying pull everything inside of base.html into this file. At this line, yeah. So then the question remains, all right, so what do I do with the rest of the crap that's living in index.html? Well, that's where the block content comes in. I specified block content in index.html, so everything inside of here is a part of that block. And if I go into base, you'll see I've specified block content as well. So as long as the block name is the same, as long as they're both called block content or my block or whatever the hell you want to call it, the content from index will be inserted here. So if I were to put some kind of footer, no matter what I do, no matter what I put inside of index.html, the content will always be loaded above my footer.
Wouldn't you just like, I feel like you would just eventually get to the point where you just have every single component of your UI is like a separate file, and then you just block content, everything in.
Exactly.
So it's like, okay, that's what you do.
So that's ideally how we would Djangoize everything, right? So what I would do, and we could start working through this as I'm at 17% now. Really? Okay. So, or I'm at 17 minutes now. So what we can do is inside of base, I have a content, right? So what if I wanted to have a header? So what I could do is I could say block, header, end block, so this is where my header will go. And then I can repeat the process, and I can say block, footer,
Can a block exist within another block?
I don't remember.
So like if you have a block container, and then you put, so it's like if you have a large panel that's a block, and then you put another block in there.
I think you can nest blocks like that. We can test that here in a second.
I mean, it's not important. I was curious.
Well, what I'll do is I'll say block so okay, so now I have a file that's made entirely of block statements, right? So now what do I do to make it actually load stuff? So I'm going to come up here now, and I'm going to add a bunch of extends. So I'm going to say extends header.html, extends footer.html. So by extending header and footer in base, we don't have to worry about extending the header and footer in the rest of the files, because they're already being included in base. So in base, all we need to do is extend base HTML. Or I'm sorry, in our next file, so in index, all we have to do is extend base. And then also add a block subcontent. Okay, so I think end block. Then we'll say sub. Okay, so there's that. So now, what files are we missing? We're missing a header and we're missing a footer. New HTML file, we'll call it header, and we'll get rid of all this stuff, and we'll say h4. We'll say welcome, and we'll just wrap this in a block. Now we got to do the same thing and put a footer in there. So if we double check, so I've got a block for header, I've got a block for footer, I've got a block for content and block for subcontent. So now assuming we wired everything up correctly, what we should see is, if I start my server again, okay, so extends cannot appear more than once in the same template. I think you're right. Yeah. Let me see. Let me remember the syntax here. Actually, it might be. I might be thinking of this wrong. It might be include. Might be an include statement. Let's go back here. Okay, so what do we notice about this?
Footer is above the content.
And because we converted them to includes, what do we think happened?
It did. Yeah, it should say.
What? I'm sorry. What? And what? Yeah. So what? All we did was pull in footer code from another page. Now, hypothetically, right? This doesn't matter, right? So I changed the location. I reload the page. Now it's at the bottom. What difference does it make? Well, realistically, none. We can do it this way. It really just boils a lot down to personal preference. Trying to remember what the content, let me see. So, yeah, so we have to use includes. Now, what's the other solution to this? Define your header and footer in the base. So, or better yet, just use includes like we did. Right, because think about it. So, header is always going to be right here in that file. Whatever we pull in from the other file, the rendering order is still going to be the same. Now, the other thing that we got to think about is, all right, so regardless of how that header content is getting there, if we style it properly with CSS, how the file is actually structured from an HTML perspective really shouldn't matter, because we should be able to move it wherever we want to with JavaScript and HTML.
I
Right.
didn't see the subcontent. Unless I missed it.
Did the subcontent pull? It actually might not have pulled. Let me see. Index.py. So I put it outside of it. So let's try it like that and reload. Okay, so the subcontent is there now. But okay, so I guess that's a good point. If we're going to nest content blocks, we need to make sure that the parent block contains the child block, right? So if we're going to say block content, block subcontent, subcontent being inside of block content, that whatever we're extending, wherever we're pulling in base HTML, what was I going to say? Whenever we're doing that, we are matching our nested blocks. Now, here's another question, right? So if I say include base HTML, what do we think is going to happen? Because it's basically doing the same thing. It's pulling in the HTML code.
Probably error because you have two references.
What do
You'll
you
have to include here, and then on the base you'll have the extends.
Well, no, we have the include in the base, right? So if we look, we have an include header and an include footer. So what's happening is that we're calling index, which is including base, which is including header and footer, which could be including other files.
Okay.
So what do we think will happen?
I'll just double up.
So the content still got loaded, but the order changed. So if we look at base, right? So ideally we would see header, footer, and then the content in the middle. But what changed about that, right? So now our footer's here, right? So now our footer is here. Our content and our subcontent is here. So this is something I'm going to talk about a little bit more on Thursday. This is this idea of template inheritance in Django, right? So when we extend, we're actually inheriting attributes of the parent template. So when we extend base.html, we're actually inheriting the location of the block, we're inheriting the include statements, which is why we can map directly from block content to block content, and the content gets inserted right where the block content is in the base. Whereas if we do an include, what we're doing is we're including everything from the base.html in where we're calling includes and then dumping our content there. Because whether it's in a block or not, it's going to render still. The block really only tells us where in the HTML it should render, right? So what attributes should it have? So this is something to keep in mind when we want to do inheritance versus inclusion, right? So inclusion could be things like including headers and footers and nav bars and things like that. Inheritance is really where we want to have consistency across all of our pages. We want all of our child pages to have the same attributes as the parent class, as the parent page, or like the same JavaScript. Maybe not JavaScript, but like the same attributes, you know what I mean? So that we can map the content. Make sense? Let me see.
Do the double brackets, if you go back to base or index,
Um,
on the, does that have any like formatting options?
what do you mean?
I don't know, like what if you like return, like are you allowed to write pure Python within those bracket percents, or is it just, does it have to be, I'm kind of confused at like the limitations of.
So not entirely right. So we can get into actually writing our own tags for the templates, which we'll get into. That's a little bit more of an advanced topic. But there is some what's called filters. And what a filter does is similar to, I forget, was it called? It's a filter in JSF, right? So how we can process, yeah, it's a no, I think it's a slightly different name than that. But if we go into util XML, where the hell did I put that? Is it in beans? Oh, validators. Validators in JSF. So we have a name validator that'll take an input and return an error. In Python, we can write a Python filter, or not a Python filter, but a Django filter to process our Django variable in some way, shape, or form. So what I can do is I can get a little bit more advanced with this, right? So I have a for loop, but let's say I get rid of the for loop entirely, and I want to say if, if variables length, so if the number of variables or the length of the string, I don't remember what it does with int, I think it's number of digits. If variables length is equal to, how many did I have, 3 or 4? 3. So if variables length is equal to 3, I was going to write pure Python there. We'll say now, what am I doing here? I'm saying if the number of items in the variables array is equal to 3, print the number of variables. Otherwise, what we can do, and we can do elif statements, we can do else statements, but let's do a simple else statement. Excuse me. Do a simple. Oh, that's class.